All set? Good afternoon. Welcome to the April 3rd, 2025 meeting of the Baltimore City Planning Commission, meeting number 2070. I'm John Laria, the Commission Chair. Welcome to the commissioners and to those who might be here for various items. We will begin with a roll call. Mr. Executive Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Robin Allen.
Present.
The Honorable John Bullock.
Present.
Christine Griffin.
Present.
Talib Horn.
Present.
Claudia Jolin.
Present.
Douglas McCoach.
Present.
Justin Williams.
Present.
Jane Lewis, Assistant Deputy Mayor, sitting in today.
Eric Stevenson.
Present.
And John Laria.
Present. Thank you. So we have a quorum. We'll begin with the agenda. The next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. Ms. Jolin, were you going to make a motion? Did you have a question?
I have a comment on the minutes, which is on item number 8. Well, I do not believe I made a motion and also seconded it, so I would like to make a comment that is probably incorrect.
On which item?
Item number 8.
We will note that as a technical correction. Extra points to Ms. Jolin for pointing that out. Thank you very much. With that,
Corrected. Sometimes multiple people speak, but it's quiet and I get around.
no problem. With that correction, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries. Thank you. We'll move to the consent agenda. The first item is the CIP transfers. Commissioners have this material in your briefing materials. And the first one is CIP transfers from the Board of Estimates meeting of March the 19th. I will just read them briefly and see if anybody has questions or if anybody has anything they want to add. The first transfer is a DOT transfer regarding, and I'm not going to read the details, but resurfacing jock for urgent needs to urgent needs citywide. The second is a Rec and Parks transfer from Park Building Renovation Reserve and other accounts to Park Building Renovation Active 2. The third, and there's a brief summary of what the purpose of each of these in your materials. The third one is a transfer from citywide stream restoration revenue bonds to a specific storm drain repair for emergency construction. And those are the three. The first two staff advises are consistent with the CIP, and the staff recommends approval because the transfer is moving funds from reserve accounts to an active account. The third one, regarding stream restoration, is deemed not consistent with the CIP. Staff nonetheless recommends approval because of the urgent matter of the collapse of the Tiffany Run storm drain. It says the appropriations are being drawn from DPW's bundled stormwater reserve, and going forward, projects will be appropriated in unique active accounts, and a few more details are there regarding the project. Those are the capital transfers from the meeting of March the 19th of the Board of Estimates. Let's take a motion, and then we can have any questions. Is there a motion to approve those?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any questions, comments about the March 19 BOE CIP transfers? Hearing none. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. The second set of capital transfers are from the Board of Estimates meeting of April the 2nd. There are 7 of them. I will try and do them very quickly. I just think it's worth just a quick summary. One is the transfer of funds from the Fire Department Facility Improvements General Fund to the Waverly Firehouse Improvements. In this instance, I think I'll just summarize each one as I go. Transfer will provide funds to DGS for the improvements at Waverly Firehouse and associated costs. It is not consistent with the CIP, but staff recommends approval as funds are coming from a project dedicated for citywide BCFD facility improvements. The second is the Department of General Services. This is a transfer from Fire Department Facility Improvements General Fund to the Fire Marshal's Office roof replacement. This will provide funds to DGS to replace the roof at the Fire Marshal's Office and associated in-house costs, help prevent water intrusion and damages. Again, not consistent with the CIP, but staff recommends approval, again, as funds are coming from a project dedicated citywide to transferred to a more specific purpose. The third is a parking authority item, transferring from Franklin Street Garage Improvements Parking Facilities revenue to Penn Station Garage. The transfer is needed to determine root causes of water infiltration at Penn Station, and it describes the deficiencies and defects. And staff is not consistent with the CIP, but staff recommends approval because improvements to the Franklin Street Garage, which is the source for this, are included in other projects. Transfer 4, also parking authority, Market Center Garage, parking facilities revenue to Market Center Garage elevator. This is to credit a deficit consistent with the CIP coming from a reserve account to a eliminated deficit. And finally, finally for the parking authority, Franklin Street Garage Improvements, Parking Facilities revenue to the Baltimore Street Garage Elevator Modernization Plan needed to modernize and replace the elevator system at the Baltimore Street Garage. I can personally attest the elevator system at the Baltimore Street Garage needs to be replaced. Not consistent with the CIP, but again, improvements in the Franklin Street Garage, which is the source, are included in other projects. There are finally 2 from DPW. One is a transfer from the Montebello dehumidification improvement revenue bonds from revenue bonds and county's grant capital to Montebello 2 dehumidification. Transfer covers a deficit and cost associated with a certain task order. It's consistent with the CIP. Staff recommends approval. Funds from a reserve account to an active account for the same purpose. And finally, annual facilities improvement transfer from that account to rehabilitation PSTs 3 and 4 Back River will cover a deficit and cost associated with certain change orders. And staff is not consistent with the CIP, but staff is recommending approval as funds are coming from a reserve account designated broadly for facility improvement projects. You can tell me if this recitation is a bad idea, but it seems to me that it's worth a few minutes of just running through it so that people can hear and have on the record a little bit of a sense of what these are. But I'll be happy to take your feedback, and hopefully there won't be too many of these to consider. I'll also remind everybody that we are working on, as has been briefed to us before, we are working on getting this process in the right order, which is that under the applicable law, the commission is really supposed to hear these before the BOE, whether that happens and whether it changes the nature of the discussion. I guess we'll see when that happens. So that's the second set, April 2nd BOE CIP transfers. I'll first take a motion and a second, and then we can discuss if necessary. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Now, is there any discussion on any of those from the commission? Hearing none? Okay, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. The next consent agenda item, I'll turn it to.
That's it.
Yep.
The next item on the agenda, consent agenda, is City Council Bill number 25-0039, City Streets closing 16-foot alley and a portion of a 10-foot alley in the 7th Councilmatic District.
Thank you. Mr. Tiso, are you presenting this to explain? I know it's a consent agenda item. I just want people to understand what we're doing. I think it's been
Sure.
previously approved by the commission.
It was.
And that's why it's back.
In
but-
2023, and then the bill didn't make it through at the end of the last council session, so this is a reintroduction, which is why it's on your consent agenda, since the commission has already heard it, and the prior staff report and cover memo is online for your review.
Right. Okay. Is there is there a motion to approve this item, first of all?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the item before we have a voice vote? Hearing none. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. And then we have one regular agenda item before returning to our CIP briefing, and I'll ask Executive Secretary to read it for us.
The only regular item on the agenda is City Council Bill number 25-0037, a zoning conditional use conversion of a single-family dwelling unit to 3 dwelling units in the R8 zoning district with variances at 1727 McCullough Street in the 7th District. Justin Williams will present.
Hey, good afternoon, Commission. So I'm Justin Walker, going to be presenting this afternoon on Council Bill 25-0037, which is a pretty straightforward conditional use of a single-family dwelling into 2 dwelling units in an R8 zone. And it does also include a parking variance, which I will address momentarily. But this is in the West Planning District with Tariq Bolden as the community planner. So just to get oriented, this is in the Madison Park neighborhood, just below, a couple blocks below West North Avenue. It is a row house in a middle of a row. There's one, as you can see, larger multifamily unit also on the same block. And that 3-story structure in the center of the screen is the subject property.
Which one?
With
the green outline windows?
Yes, the gray tinted one.
Great, sorry.
It would have to play through again to get back to that image.
No, it's all right. Thank you.
But here we are on the city view map of the property and an aerial shot. And as we turn to the rear of the property, I wanted to address the parking variance. I did get a late word from the applicant that they are planning to provide 1 parking space on a pad in the rear. There was not an existing parking spot for the existing dwelling. So because they're adding 1 unit and they're adding 1 parking space, that will negate the need for the parking variance for this property. And just to mention conformity to the plans, the general land use plan designates this property as a residential higher density, which this project does conform to. So of course, with the conditional use conversion, which is the only thing before us today, as there are no variances required, the conditions are that the structure must be constructed as a single-family dwelling, which is the case here, and that structure must be 1,500 square feet or more in gross floor area, not including the basement. The 3 floors that are above grade on the property total 2,067 square feet, meeting this requirement. And the other standards for conversion are the square footage of the individual units. This is a proposal for 1 3-bedroom unit and 1 4-bedroom unit. And the requirement for 3 or more is 1,250 square feet. As you can see, with 1,300 and 1,400 square feet respectively, both of these units will be meeting that standard as well. And just to go through a quick equity assessment of this project. So of course, this will bring 2 units online. This structure is currently vacant, so it will return that to productive use. Of course, we all like to see plywood come off the windows and vacants returned to providing housing units. And also a common concern when subdividing a single-family dwelling is that typically we see 1 or 2 bedroom apartment units created. As mentioned, this will create a 3-bedroom and a 4-bedroom, which are more suitable for larger families or perhaps multi-generational households to be able to accommodate them with rental units. As far as notification, the Madison Park Improvement Association was notified and provided a letter of support, which should be on your Wix page. And of course, the applicant did post the required notice for 10 days before the hearing today. And so with that, go next slide. We are recommending approval of the project. Had some
Thank you. Mr. Walker,
Suspense there.
did you say that this now, as been modified, is only a conditional use application and no longer a variance application?
That is correct. The only required variance was for parking, which the applicant will address with the rear parking pad. So the conversion is the only.
Well, so having said that, I just want to say, sort of, for the record, I'm certainly supportive of this. You know, we're going to have to get our arms around the question of what constitutes meeting a standard for variance. I don't know that your staff report, if you were looking for a variance, would necessarily meet that standard. It's not your fault. It's a question of what the actual requirements are for a variance. Ultimately, the city council has to sort that out, but we're sort of we're the preview of it, if you will. And I think in a way with this, just because what is being asked for is actually a very reasonable thing, I think we've got to figure out with our colleagues, if I may, at the city council, how to address these kinds of concerns.
Right.
Because I think, this is not the time for a big discussion about variance law, but I think we have to be mindful of what's required. And I know there's a lot of discussion about changing what you need a variance for, which frankly, I think would be a more fruitful discussion than continued applications for variances. I can say this safely in this case because you don't need one.
Right.
But I just want to say that it's a subject of concern, I think, that we and our friends at the BMZA and in the city council probably need to be talking about. Councilman, just.
I'll just say we began having some conversations around this, so it'll likely move forward. I know Councilman Schleifer has had some issues around that. Councilman Dorsey, Chair Dorsey of the Land Use Committee, we've been talking about that, so duly noted.
It just seems to me to be, when something is, and I know intuitively is subjective, but when something seems intuitively reasonable, as I think this does, we should not be creating barriers in the regulatory scheme to people's willingness to invest. I think you said it's a vacant property?
Yes, it's currently.
So it's a vacant property, we want to put it into productive use. Fortunately, you don't need the variance here, but if you did, we ought to struggle with that, and we shouldn't have to struggle with that. There's no reason in sort of a, ordinary assessment of things that this project shouldn't be supportable. So I think we've got to figure out how to make the code work in a way that doesn't continue to put the BMZA, the Planning Commission, the City Council into this position.
I agree. It can certainly be difficult to find uniqueness on a row house.
Well,
lot
in a
when
city of
they
row,
are.
I mean, the whole question of how you apply uniqueness is to a city of that, not a city of row houses, but a city that has a lot of row houses. So anyway, thank you for allowing me to say that. I'll take a motion and a second, and then we can have any further discussion. Is there a motion to accept the staff's findings with respect to conditional use and the analysis, as well as its recommendation for approval, again, just on the conditional use?
Motion to accept and approve?
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Floor is open for discussion.
Quick
Sure.
request for clarification, and I think it may be a detail. I do support this as well as other conversions of these types of buildings. You said that the gross area of the building is 2,067 square feet.
That's correct.
And the two units, the minimum would be 1,250 for each. That would be 2,500 square feet. You also pointed out that the gross area did not include the basement. And so I was just trying to reconcile, if we have a unit that we know is going to incorporate the basement, why isn't that basement square footage a part of the minimum?
I think I got. So the conversion standards do not allow the basement to be calculated as far as determining the total floor area of the building. They do not prevent it from being used, from my understanding, but as far as the calculation of the total gross floor area, the conversion standards don't allow the basement to be taken into account.
I mean, I was looking at the picture, and the basement level has windows, and you could see how it could be converted very easily. But right now, it seems like the unit area is requiring on the basement, which isn't counted.
Sure, I can answer some of that since I have the advantage of history of where this came from. So for over a century, typically zoning has dealt with lot area as a X times Y divided by factor equals number of units. And we've been having conversations, especially with some of the newer members to council, that just intuitively understand, well, gee, that, if you have a long lot that has a small home on it, or alternatively a big house on a small lot, those two don't have anything to do with each other. And so there's now some conversation around maybe we should be looking at the interior space versus building code requirements and not add this extra layer in the way. At the time when these conversion standards were created for the current zoning code, when it was being drafted, there was a desire to try and figure out the size of property versus building. And so a lot of the conversions that we had seen at that time, many of them did not have full walkout basements, and so that's why the numbers landed where they did, because it was approximately center of mass. Of course, there's going to be some outliers, but that's why we landed with that semi-convoluted set of calculations to get to that point of how much space is reasonable, what sizes of units are functional. Now, as a practical matter, it's not quite been 100% satisfactory. because you have floor plates that are what they are in row homes, and sometimes the upper floor, whether it's the second or the third floor, is a little bit shorter than the others below it. There's not a good way, if you have one unit per floor, to borrow 35 square feet from the floor below it, even though the total may average out, if that makes sense. So we're interested in looking at other ways to potentially look at this that will make more operational sense, will meet building code requirements, will generally fit the policy desire for density. We're just not there yet, but there's been some conversations started in that direction.
Again, I think in some ways, it's a detail to the overall intention of the conversion, but it would be a useful hole to close, especially in the sense that we're not allowed, or we don't often get floor plans that help us to understand. So,
And that's actually one of the concerns that I have going forward is if we, and I'm just speaking off the cuff since we're not holding anyone else up at the moment, except for maybe Sarah, who's briefing next, with apologies. If we go to a pure square footage of the building standard, that means applicants will need to provide that to us, and historically, we've had difficulties getting somebody to do an as-built set of floor plans or even getting us a good gouge on what that looks like, which is why historically you've probably gone a lot of area factors, because I can tell you how big your property is. I can't guarantee within 10% I'm going to get your interior floor plate calculation correct. So all of these things are going to have to be weighed, but we have to work on it.
thank you.
If I could
Yes,
make
please.
a couple
Of course,
comments,
yeah.
I would just add to that we might want to consider different standards for conversions and new construction, because there's a lot of debate about what the right size for an efficient unit is. And I think that there's a lot of efficiencies in new construction that you don't necessarily have in an old row home with an existing floor plan. And part of the reason that we're struggling with this variance thing is because we're trying to have a one-size-fits-all solution, and it never fits all. So that might be one way to separate that and make it more applicable. The other comment I wanted to make, to your point, is that last year when we reviewed Councilman Dorsey's Abundant Housing Act, I think it was called, this committee voted in favor of supporting 2-unit conversions by right under certain conditions, such as this would have been an example. And since that bill didn't pass the council, we've continued to relitigate each case here around this table, even though we decided last year as a committee that these should be by right. And I think Mr. Tiso has explained to me in the past a good reason why this can't be moved to the consent agenda, but I'll just throw that out there again.
And Councilman Dorsey is still looking at options to have a twist on his prior bill, so it's not all forgotten. And currently, there is a difference between new construction and conversions. And you may recall in his presentation, he said, I could take an existing building, knock it down, build it back, stick for stick, identical structure that's new, and the rules are different. So there is a difference now. Our old code had a difference between efficiency units and dwelling units, which frankly was abused because it had a lower lot area standard to it, and in some cases was the difference of one wall inside, which is why we went to just a dwelling unit's a dwelling unit's a dwelling unit. So all of these factors have to be combined to figure out what is the best in the majority of circumstances, but this will be back to you before very long.
I want to say one other thing, but let's have a vote. First, let's have any other discussion. Are there any other comments or questions for staff or for each other? None? Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you very much, Justin.
Thank you.
There's a lot of conversation going on about how to simplify some of these things. I'm aware, I think, that Chairman Dorsey he's still working on his abundant housing. I think it's perhaps going to be a slightly different name, but he's got some innovations that he's interested in. I think there are some amendments that are being discussed even to the bill that this commission heard at the last meeting, the zoning modifications bill, where there are opportunities to do a few other things. And, you know, at the end of the day, I mean, not everybody's going to agree on everything, and at some point, the city council, presumably the mayor, will vote, and there'll either will be enough votes or there won't, and hopefully our input will be taken into account. But I think we're here in part to help to highlight these issues, to do our job with respect to applying the relevant law and so on. And I'm sorry if this is sort of a lawyer thing, but the way I look at these things is like, tell me what I absolutely can't do because there's some superseding law. So like in other terms, that's like the Constitution says this, you can't change it, right? In the city version, the charter says this, you can change the charter, but if you don't change the charter, you can't do these things. But when you get, there is also state law out there that is either in the land use article, which preempts essentially everything that the city can do because the city zoning power is derived from the state's land use article. So the land use article defines what we can do, and it sets some limits. The land use article for Baltimore happens to be a land use article that really pertains only to the city of Baltimore. It's a peculiar history. Land use article is very complicated, but arguably there are changes that can be made in the state land use article for the city of Baltimore alone that have no impact in other jurisdictions that might help to simplify things. And then, of course, you have what we're all very accustomed to, which is the mayor and city council, so long as the charter doesn't prohibit, so long as the land use article doesn't prohibit, and so on, making some changes. We're not always going to agree on what it is we want to do, but where we can get agreement, or at least sufficient agreement, we should be looking at making these changes if we like the outcome that they're going to achieve, including if the law of variances is in the way of a particular thing and there is sufficient belief that that's something that shouldn't require variance, then we should change the law. And the other thing, and we haven't talked about this before, Mr. Tiso, but the other possibility is to try and take advantage of the standards for conditional uses, which are, as the commission knows, essentially lower than the standards for variances under both state and under relevant law. And the possibility of allowing things to proceed as a conditional use versus a variance, which kind of what you call it changes the standard a little bit. So there's a lot of stuff out there. Do you want to say something?
Funny you mentioned this. I just was having a conversation with Executive Director Witt at BMZA yesterday and debating the merit of using conditional use because they've been having difficulty when conditional use heights come to them because the standard of trying to apply a use type standard to a bulk thing in lieu of a variance is difficult for them. I'm not a lawyer, that both of you are, so I'll leave it to you to tell me what's right or wrong. And then because it's conditional use standards, when neighbors arrive to talk about it or express their concerns, they don't understand the difference in findings very easily. So that was not necessarily a favored option from the BMZA, but we just had this conversation yesterday.
Yeah, there are, and what Mr. Tiso is referring to is that there are a couple of instances in the zoning code where additional height can be obtained under certain circumstances via conditional use, not by variance. I can appreciate why it might be hard for the BMZA to apply, as you say, conditional use standards, which we're familiar with. In fact, they even appear in the staff report, to dimensional issues. But there are tools available to us, and I think we all have to decide what we're trying to achieve here. And at the end of the day, at the very least, if the city council doesn't want to do it, it's probably not going to happen because you need the city council to approve it. But if, on the other hand, if the city council or a sufficient number of council members want to do it and the administration supports it, I think we have a much more flexibility than we have given ourselves to date. And we spend a lot of time grinding away in frustration at things like minor variances and so on, when everybody says this is a perfectly good thing, we just need to figure out the right legal way to get there. So my sense is that this is an issue for the BMZA, both the board members and the staff. It's an issue for council members. I've talked to Chair Dorsey about it. I know it's an issue for me, and I know it's been facing this commission and our staff. So, if we're going to try and make things easier to do, again, when it's appropriate, not everything easier just for the heck of it, but when it's appropriate, I think there is fertile ground here to do that. And I'm encouraging everybody to sort of try and develop that approach so that we can focus on the bigger issues and not on trying to explain to homeowners who want to make totally reasonable investments and reoccupy homes and redevelop neighborhoods why they can't do something that to the sort of that intuitively and to the ordinary eye are just totally reasonable things to do. So anyway, thank you for hearing me out on that. Okay, so I think that is the end of the regular agenda.